The coffee was still hot when my son called to tell me I wasn't welcome at my own grandson's baptism. I remember the exact moment. I was standing at the kitchen sink, watching a cardinal on the back fence, the same fence my husband Gerald built the summer before he got sick. The bird was impossibly red against the gray November sky. And I was thinking about how Gerald used to say cardinals were visits from people we'd lost. I was thinking about him, feeling that particular quiet that comes on Sunday mornings when you live alone and the house holds its breath around you. Then my phone buzzed on the counter. I saw Daniel's name and smiled. My son called every Sunday. It was our thing. Had been since he moved to Portland 11 years ago. An hour, sometimes more. We talked about everything: his work, my garden, old memories, bad television. Those calls were the thread that kept us stitched together across 400 miles. I picked up on the second ring. Danny. I always called him Danny, even at 38. He'd stopped correcting me years ago. There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "Hey, Mom." His voice had a texture I didn't recognize. Careful. Ironed flat. "So, listen. About the baptism next month, Serena and I have been talking, and we've decided to keep it really small. Just her parents, her sister, a couple of close friends. We think Noah will do better without a big crowd overwhelming him." I stood very still. "I'm his grandmother," I said. I didn't mean it as an argument. It came out more like a simple statement of fact. The way you'd say the sky is blue or water is wet. "I know, Mom. I know. But Serena she has a vision for the day, you know? She wants it to be intimate. And you know how you and she are sometimes. I knew exactly how she and I were sometimes. We were fine, perfectly polite. It was Serena who found reasons to end visits early, who scheduled family weekends on dates I'd already mentioned I was free, who answered my calls to my son in a particular tone that made me feel like I was interrupting something important. But I had never once said a cross word to her. I had brought her flowers when Noah was born. I had driven 4 hours in February sleet when Daniel had his emergency appendectomy, and I had sat in that waiting room with Serena for 6 hours. And we had held hands when the surgeon came out. I thought we had an understanding, she and I. "Of course," I said. "I understand." I hung up and stood at the window for a long time. The cardinal was gone. The fence looked smaller than I remembered. Daniel had always been a gentle boy. Not weak gentle. He cried at movies and apologized to people who bumped into him, and remembered the names of every cashier at the grocery store we went to when he was growing up. His father adored him. So did I, obviously. But with Gerald, there was something extra, two quiet people who understood each other on some frequency I wasn't quite tuned to. When Gerald died 4 years ago, Daniel flew home the same night I called. He stayed for 3 weeks. He sorted through his father's workshop, labeled everything, kept the things he thought I'd want to find later. He was 34 years old, and he wept openly at the funeral and didn't apologize for it once. He had met Serena 8 months before Gerald died, and I had liked her then. She was striking and confident, and she looked at my son like he was worth looking at, which a mother notices. She worked in real estate, sold high-end properties in the Portland metro area, and she had the easy, practiced warmth of someone who had learned to make strangers feel at home quickly. She shook my hand with both of hers the first time we met. She told me Daniel talked about me constantly. The changes were gradual. That's the thing people don't tell you. It's never one dramatic moment. It's 100 small ones, each so minor you doubt yourself each time. The Sunday calls getting shorter, the holiday visits that kept getting trimmed for reasons that made perfect sense individually. Daniel mentioning almost offhandedly that Serena thought I was a little overbearing about the pregnancy, which stunned me, because my involvement in that pregnancy had consisted of one mailed gift basket and a single question about the birth plan. I started feeling like a guest in my own son's life. Welcomed at the door, offered something to drink, kept in the front room, never quite invited further in. After the baptism call, I waited 2 weeks before I said anything. I sent a gift for Noah, a silver cup with his name engraved, the same kind Gerald's mother had given Daniel, and I wrote a card to my son that said simply, "I love you both." give Noah a kiss from his grandmother. I didn't hear back for 10 days. When Daniel did call, he sounded relieved, like he'd been bracing for something and it hadn't come. We talked for 20 minutes. He told me the baptism had been beautiful. He did not send pictures. I told my neighbor Carol about it over tea that Friday, and she listened the way good friends do, without rushing to fill the silence. She's isolating him, Carol said finally. I don't want to think that. I know you don't. I didn't want to think it because thinking it meant the problem was too large for politeness to fix. And I had been very politely breaking my own heart for 2 years by then. The call I wasn't expecting came on a Wednesday in March. It was Serena, not Daniel. That alone made me sit down. She opened with pleasantries. How was I? How was the garden? She'd been meaning to call. I waited. Serena did not call to ask about my garden. So I wanted to talk to you about the Lakehouse, she said, shifting into the tone I recognized from the one time I'd watched her work, a showing warm but exact, like a hand guiding you somewhere before you realized you were being guided. My Lakehouse. Gerald and I had bought it 22 years ago, a small A-frame on Crescent Lake, 2 hours from Portland. We'd spent every summer there. Daniel had learned to fish off that dock. Gerald had died knowing it would stay in the family. What about it? I said. Well, I have a client, a corporate group, actually looking for a retreat property to rent for about 10 days in July. Private lake, off-grid feel, the whole thing. I immediately thought of your place. We're talking about a rental rate that would completely cover your property taxes for the year. Probably more. I'd handle everything. You wouldn't have to do a thing. She said it so smoothly, like she was doing me a favor. I'm planning to be at the lake in July, I said. There was the briefest pause. Oh, well, the dates are flexible. It would just be so perfect for them. And honestly, the property could use the income, right? Maintenance isn't cheap. She didn't know what my finances looked like. She had no reason to assume the Lakehouse needed income. I noticed that. I'll think about it, I said. Of course. And actually, another small pause, the kind that precedes the thing that was really the point all along. Daniel and I have been talking about estate planning. You know, just being practical. He mentioned the Lakehouse is still only in your name, and we thought just for simplicity it might make sense to add him to the deed now, before anything happens. You know how these things get complicated. Before anything happens. I was 63 years old and in perfect health. I'll certainly look into it, I said. I kept my voice completely steady. I learned, in 30 years of running a school, that the moment you let someone know they've rattled you is the moment you lose the conversation. We said our goodbyes. I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time after. Then I called my attorney. David Wren had handled Gerald's estate and had known our family for 15 years. When I explained the conversation, he listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I'd always appreciated about him. Don't touch the deed, he said. Not until we know what we're dealing with. What do you mean, dealing with? Maggie. A spouse asking a parent to add a child to a property deed is one thing, but the rental request followed immediately by the deed conversation. That's a specific sequence. It's the kind of thing you see when someone needs access to an asset quickly. He told me he had a contact, a private investigator he'd worked with in a few estate disputes. He said the words gently, like he was handling something that might break. I almost said no. I almost said I was being paranoid, that Serena was ambitious, and perhaps tactless, but not. Whatever David was implying. But I thought about my grandson's baptism. I thought about 2 years of being held at arm's length. I thought about before anything happens. Make the call, I said. The investigator's name was Frank Delgado, and he looked like someone who had long since stopped being surprised by anything. We met at a coffee shop downtown, and he took notes in a small spiral notebook with a mechanical pencil, and he asked questions that seemed sideways, until I realized each one was gathering something specific. He called me 9 days later. I was pruning the roses in the backyard, something Gerald had taught me. Something I still found meditative when my phone rang. I pulled off my glove and answered. Mrs. Caldwell, Frank said. I need you to sit down somewhere. Mrs. Caldwell, Frank said. I sat on the back porch steps. What he told me took about 15 minutes. I didn't speak once. Serena had been a licensed real estate agent, but her license had been flagged 18 months ago by the Oregon Real Estate Agency for a series of complaints involving misrepresented property values and undisclosed dual representation, meaning she'd been collecting fees from both buyers and sellers in transactions without telling either party. She hadn't lost her license yet because these things moved slowly, but she was under active review. That was the first part. The second part was a name I didn't recognize. Marcus Webb. Frank explained that Marcus Webb was a man in Sacramento who had filed a civil lawsuit against Serena, then using a slightly different version of her last name 5 years ago, alleging that she had convinced him to invest $80,000 in a real estate development project that did not exist in the form she'd described. The lawsuit had been settled out of court confidentially, which was why it hadn't come up in a basic background search. The third part was the credit report Daniel hadn't known to ask about before they married. Frank had accessed what he could access legally. There was significant debt not Daniel's, structured specifically in Serena's name alone. Probably deliberately, and several of the accounts had gone to collections in the past year. She needs liquid assets or property, Frank said. Quickly. That's what this is. I looked at Gerald's fence. The cardinal wasn't there. Does my son know any of this? I asked. Based on what I can tell, no. But she's very good at this, Mrs. Caldwell. That's what I want you to understand. She's had practice. I didn't call Daniel right away. I know that surprises people when I tell the story. Your first instinct is to pick up the phone immediately, but I had watched Serena operate for 3 years, and I understood one thing clearly. If I called Daniel with accusations and no proof, she would reframe it. She would make it about a difficult mother-in-law who couldn't accept her son's marriage, who was threatened by his wife, who was trying to interfere. She had already laid that groundwork beautifully. I had already been painted as overbearing. I had already been kept just far enough from my son that he sometimes looked at me through her eyes instead of his own. I needed him to see the documents first. David helped me put together a folder. Organized, clear, nothing inflammatory, just facts with sources attached. The licensing complaint with the case number. The Sacramento lawsuit. The settlement record. The debt accounts. The timeline. A brief note from David on firm letterhead explaining the legal context. Then I did something Serena would not have expected. I called Daniel and asked if I could visit. Not to talk about anything specific, I said. I just missed him. I missed Noah. I'd bring that lemon cake he loved. The one from the bakery. On Morrison Street. He sounded surprised and then genuinely glad, which broke my heart a little that his gladness surprised me. Come Saturday, he said. Serena has showings all afternoon, actually. It'll be nice. Just us and the baby. I drove to Portland on Saturday morning with the lemon cake on the passenger seat and the folder in my bag. Noah was walking now, that wide-legged, determined waddle of a 14-month-old who has recently discovered his own power. He came toward me across the living room floor with both arms slightly lifted for balance, and I went down on one knee and caught him, and he grabbed my face in both hands the way small children do, without any self-consciousness, claiming you completely. Hi, sweetheart, I said into his hair. Hi, baby. Daniel stood in the kitchen doorway watching us. And his face did something complicated. We ate lunch. Noah ate approximately 4 Cheerios and a great deal of the lemon cake. Daniel made coffee, and we sat across the kitchen table from each other the way we used to. And for a while, it was almost like before the easy rhythm, the shared shorthand, the way he'd laugh at something and then look to see if I was laughing too. Then I put the folder on the table. I need you to look at this, I said. All of it. Before I say anything, he looked at me. Mom, just read it, please. He read it slowly. I watched his face and didn't speak. I had taught school for 30 years. I knew how to wait. The change happened in degrees, the slight frown when he read the licensing complaint, the stillness when he reached the Sacramento lawsuit. The way his jaw set when he got to the debt accounts, the amounts, the dates, the pattern. When he put the last page down, he sat very quietly for a moment. Noah was asleep on a playmat in the next room. The house was still. "How long have you had this?" he asked. 3 weeks. He rubbed his face with both hands. "She asked you about the Lakehouse. And the deed? She told me the Lakehouse rental was your idea, that you'd reached out to her." We looked at each other across the table. I saw the moment he understood not just the facts in the folder, but the longer architecture of it, the way he'd been positioned between us, the version of me he'd been given, the Sunday calls getting shorter, the baptism. "I didn't know about any of this," he said. His voice came out rougher than usual. "I know you didn't. She told me you and she had talked about the deed, that you were worried about estate planning and wanted my name added for simplicity." He stopped. "She told me it was your idea, Danny." I reached across the table and put my hand on his. "None of this is your fault." He shook his head, not disagreeing, just overwhelmed. "I have a grandson," he said, almost to himself. "There's Noah." "I know." He sat for a long time. I sat with him. I didn't rush it. I had learned, in the long years of marriage and the longer years of grief and the ordinary years of raising a child, that some silences are not empty. They're full of things rearranging themselves. He called me 2 days later. Serena had come home that Saturday evening to find the folder on the kitchen table and my son sitting in the living room waiting for her. He told me she had tried 3 different versions of the story before she stopped trying. The first version was that I had misunderstood the deed conversation. The second was that the Sacramento lawsuit was a misunderstanding. The man had been unreasonable. It had been settled fairly. The third version was that she had been going to tell him about the debt. She'd been handling it. She didn't want to worry him. Each version collapsed under the weight of the documents. She had spent the night at her sister's. Daniel had called a family law attorney the following morning. "I'm so sorry," I told him. "Stop apologizing," he said, and there was something in his voice that sounded like himself. The version of him I'd been missing without quite naming what I was missing. "You didn't do anything wrong." "I should have," he stopped. "I should have been paying better attention." The licensing investigation concluded 4 months later. Serena surrendered her real estate license rather than face a formal hearing. The divorce was finalized 8 months after that. She moved to Seattle. The Sacramento creditor and 2 others reached collection agreements. Daniel and I started talking on Sundays again, sometimes for 2 hours. I went to the Lakehouse that July, the way I had planned. I sat on the dock in the late afternoon, when the light came off the water in long gold pieces, and I thought about Gerald and about the cardinal on the fence, and about how differently that march had looked in its middle than it looked from the other side. I thought about Noah, who by July was walking with great confidence and had discovered that the word no produced remarkable reactions in adults. I thought about my son, who had moved into a small house closer to the city and was slowly building something a different routine, a custody schedule, an understanding of what had happened to him and how. He called me from his back porch that Sunday evening, and I answered sitting at the end of the dock with my feet above the water. We talked for 2 hours and 14 minutes, which I know because I checked the call log after. The way you check something you want to hold on to. Noah said, "Grandma this week," he told me. I looked at the water. The light was almost gone. "Say that again," I said. He said, "Grandma." Clear as anything. Serena has him on days I work, and apparently her mom was there, and he pointed at her and said, "Grandma," and Serena had to tell him no. "That's not Grandma," Daniel laughed quietly. "She called me to tell me because she said she thought I should know. That he's asking about you." I sat on that dock for a long time after we hung up. The sky went from gold to pink, to that deep blue that isn't quite darkness yet. The first stars came out, one by one, unhurried. Gerald used to say the Lakehouse was where everything made sense again. I had thought that was just something people said about places they loved. I think I understood it for the first time that evening, how a place can hold the shape of something true how you can return to it when you've lost the thread and find yourself again in the quiet. I had not fought for my son with anger. I had not begged or demanded or made ultimatums. I had simply refused to be erased. And I had paid attention, and I had waited for the right moment to put the truth on the table and let it do its own work. Some people, when they hear the story, want to know if I feel bad for Serena. They want to know if I feel guilty, or triumphant, or vindicated. I feel relieved. That's the honest answer. I feel the particular relief of someone who carried something heavy a long way and has finally been allowed to set it down. Noah visited the Lakehouse for the first time the following August. I watched him discover the dock, the cold shock of the water, the minnows near the shallow rocks. He was terrified and fascinated in equal measure, that specific toddler combination that looks like joy from the outside. Daniel sat next to me on the dock steps and watched him, and we didn't say much of anything for a while, just the two of us and the water and the child who carries the names of people he doesn't know yet. Dad would have loved this, Daniel said eventually. He would have put the boy in a life jacket 8 sizes too large and never let him within 10 feet of the water, I said. Daniel laughed. It was Gerald's laugh, exactly something I hadn't noticed until just that moment, or maybe hadn't let myself notice. Still, he said. Still, I agreed. The afternoon was long and warm, the way August afternoons are at the lake when everything is going right. A cardinal landed on the fence post at the end of the dock, impossibly red. Unhurried, utterly certain it belonged there. I watched it for a moment. Then Noah toddled toward it with both arms out, and a sound that was something between a shriek and a greeting, and the bird lifted off in a clean red arc across the water, and my grandson watched it go with an expression of complete wonder. Again? He said, looking back at me. I pulled him into my lap. It'll come back, I told him. They always do.